The first time Princess Velthari saw the human, she laughed. Not the polite, suppressed laugh she performed at diplomatic banquets when some lesser species embarrassed itself. The real one, high and sharp, the one her handmaidens recognized as the sound of cruelty wearing joy's face. She was walking the lower observation deck of Station Carathvel when she spotted him through the reinforced viewport. A pale, stubby-limbed creature in a trainee's gray coveralls, crouched beside a coolant coupling 3 levels below, doing something absurd with a length of stripped wire and what appeared to be a piece of its own boot. "What," she said, "is that?" Adjutant Surith checked her datapad. Human designation, Callum Ray's rank, Trainee Maintenance Division. Age equivalent, 32 of their solar cycles. And the wing patches. None, Highness. He hasn't earned classification yet. She looked back through the viewport. The human was biting the wire with its teeth. She laughed again. Callum, Cal to anyone who'd known him longer than a week, was not unaware he was being watched. You developed a sense for that kind of thing when you were the only human on a 700-meter alien hunting station, orbiting a gas giant in a system that didn't even have a name yet, just a catalog designation. Ethon 11. You learn to feel the quality of attention the way you learn to feel a draft in a pressurized hull, not by seeing it, but by the small hairs on the back of your neck reporting for duty. He kept working. The coolant coupling had sheared at the secondary thread, which meant the bypass loop feeding the lower observation deck's environmental controls was running on a single-line input. Whoever had designed this station, and Cal had spent 3 months learning their design language the hard way, had built redundancies into everything except the bypass loops, because whoever they were, they'd assumed their own people would be doing maintenance. Their own people used 3-fingered hands with an opposable secondary claw that could torque a fitting to exactly the right tension by feel. Cal had 5 fingers, no secondary claw, and a piece of boot rubber he'd peeled off his left heel. He packed the rubber into the thread housing, used the stripped wire as a friction brace, and torqued the coupling by hand until the vibration in the lines smoothed out. The environmental readout on his wrist panel ticked from amber back to green. He sat back on his heels and looked up at the viewport, where the princess had been standing. She was already gone. He'd figured she would be. Station Carathvel was not, technically, a hunting station. Its official designation was Research and Coordination Platform, Ethon Sector. In practice, it served as a staging ground for the Veltharak Conclave's apex hunting expeditions, the sport of the wealthy and powerful across 6 star systems, in which parties of well-equipped hunters tracked and killed the most dangerous fauna in the known galaxy. The station maintained a trophy hall that Cal had walked through once and then quietly decided never to walk through again. The hunting parties rotated through in cycles. The current party had arrived 3 weeks ago, Princess Velthari of the Conclave's 3rd house, accompanied by 8 Apex-certified hunters, 43 support staff, and the kind of equipment list that made the station's logistics division weep with logistical joy. They were here to hunt the Carathvel's local apex predator, a creature the station staff called, in their own language, something that translated roughly as the thing that makes the deep cold. A semi-aquatic ambush predator that lived in the gas giant's upper atmosphere and occasionally surfaced into near space on what appeared to be territorial excursions. In 30 years of station operation, the creature had been sighted 14 times. In 12 of those sightings, it had killed something. The princess had come specifically to kill it. Cal was here because 6 months ago, humanity had made first contact with the Veltharak Conclave at a way station near the inner edge of Conclave space, and in the subsequent weeks of frantic diplomatic negotiation, someone in the human government, someone who'd clearly never done field work of any kind, had decided the best way to demonstrate human capability was to embed a maintenance trainee in a Conclave facility. Cal had been picked because he'd survived 17 months aboard the UHSS Kestrel, humanity's last operational deep space vessel, after the Kestrel's drive core had failed and left them drifting in non-conclave space for 11 months waiting for rescue. He knew how to keep things running when the thing they were running on was held together with stripped wire and boot rubber, and the particular stubborn refusal to accept that something was broken beyond fixing. What he had not been told before accepting the assignment was that the conclave word for trainee was the same word they used for creature under evaluation, which, in hunting culture, carried implications he'd found out about only after he was already aboard. He fixed the coupling, Adjutant Surith reported the following morning, standing before Velthari in the Hunt Command Suite, without approved tools, without filing a maintenance request. The environmental logs show the bypass loop has been stable for 14 hours. With boot rubber, Highness. Velthari was looking out the main viewport at the gas giant below, its atmosphere a slow churn of copper and violet, beautiful and indifferent. She had hunted on 7 worlds. She had taken trophies from apex predators that most hunters never saw alive. She understood, deeply and instinctively, the difference between a creature that was genuinely dangerous and a creature that merely appeared so. "Keep watching him," she said. "I want to know what else he does." What he did over the next 4 days was an education. He recalibrated the atmospheric scrubbers in the lower barracks using a method nobody on the station had seen before, something involving a reversed pressure cycle and a counterintuitive adjustment to the intake timing that shouldn't have worked according to the station's technical manuals, but that reduced particulate count by 31%. He identified a hairline fracture in one of the station's secondary hull plates using nothing but his bare hand against the metal, pressed his palm flat, and stood there for nearly a minute, then marked the spot with a grease pencil and filed a hull integrity report that the station's automated systems hadn't flagged. When the follow-up scan confirmed the fracture exactly where he'd marked it, the station chief engineer, a veteran named Torath Ven, stared at the scan results for a long time without speaking. "How?" Torath Ven finally said. "Vibration frequency changes near a fracture," Cal said. "You can feel it if you know what you're looking for." "Our systems." "Your systems are looking for pressure differential. The fracture's hairline. No pressure differential yet, but the resonance is wrong." He paused. "I used to work on a ship that was held together with wrong resonance for 11 months. You develop a feel for it." Torath Ven stared at him. Then he pulled up the maintenance log and started going through it with new eyes. Princess Velthari learned about the hull fracture from Surith, who had made it her business to know everything that happened on the station. The princess listened to the account without expression, then asked to see the fracture coordinates on the station schematic. She looked at them for a while. "That's adjacent to the secondary coolant conduit," she said. "Yes, Highness." "If that fracture had propagated, the conduit would have vented into the maintenance corridor. At current pressure differential, the resulting flash freeze event would have killed anyone in the corridor and probably breached the tertiary hull section." She paused, "and our systems missed it." Surith said nothing. The answer was implicit. Velthari looked back at the schematic. In hunting, she had learned to tell the difference between prey that was slow and prey that was merely appearing to be slow, prey that was conserving energy, reading terrain, waiting for the moment when speed would matter. She'd made mistakes in her early career by dismissing animals that seemed passive. She'd learned better. "Schedule a briefing," she said. "I want to talk to the human." The Hunt Command Suite was the most impressive room on the station, designed to communicate power and purpose, with a curved viewport that gave a 180-degree view of the gas giant and the star beyond it. The walls were hung with trophy images, holographic records of past kills, every one of them framed to show the hunter in control, and the prey in the moment of its end. Cal stood in the center of it in his gray coveralls, a data stylus tucked behind his ear, and looked around with the expression of someone calculating load-bearing capacity. "You're assessing the room," Velthari said. She was seated at the primary command station, elevated 3 steps above the floor. Her 8 hunters were arrayed behind her, standard display of hierarchy. "Why?" "Force of habit." Cal's gaze settled on her. "Your conduit junction on the starboard wall is showing a flex pattern I don't love. Probably nothing. I'd want to check the fixtures." One of the hunters, a large one, with the double-banded shoulder markings that indicated Apex class certification, made a sound of contempt. His name was Kerthal, and he was the most decorated active hunter in the Conclave's 3rd house, with 11 Apex kills across 4 systems. He stood 6 feet 8 in his boots and had forearms like structural beams. "Trainee," Kerthal said, the word landing with the particular weight of someone who knew exactly what it implied in hunting culture. "You're here to answer questions, not evaluate fixtures." "Sure," Cal said. "What are the questions?" Velthari watched the exchange with interest. The human hadn't flinched, hadn't puffed up either, just redirected the way a competent mechanic redirects when someone points out they're doing something unusual calmly, without apology. "The hull fracture," she said. "How did you find it?" He explained it the same way he'd explained it to Torath Ven. The resonance frequency, the feel of the metal, the 11 months on a crippled ship. His voice was even throughout. No performance of the story, no attempt to make himself sound impressive. Kerthal cut in before he finished. "So you guessed." "I didn't guess. I recognized a pattern, different thing." "Based on what? You have no formal training in conclave maintenance protocols." "No, I have 11 months of practical experience keeping a ship alive by feel." Cal paused. "Formal training tells you what should happen. Experience tells you what is happening. They're both useful, but they're not the same." The silence in the room had a specific quality, the quality of people recalibrating. Velthari let it sit for a moment. Then she said, "The Karath creature surfaces in 6 days. I intend to hunt it. I'm told you've been reviewing the station's encounter logs." "As part of maintenance review. The last 3 encounters caused structural damage to the station's lower sections. I wanted to understand the damage patterns." "And?" Cal looked at her. There was something in his eyes she found difficult to read. Not caution, not calculation, but something more like the expression of someone who has already worked out an answer and is deciding how much of it to share. "The damage patterns suggest the creature isn't attacking the station," he said. "It's using the station as a navigation reference. The impacts are all on the same face, same elevation band, same approximate timing within the surfacing cycle. It's not trying to breach the hull, it's orienting." The hunters exchanged looks. "That's not consistent with apex predator behavior," Kerthal said, but his tone had shifted slightly, the contempt not entirely gone but no longer the dominant note. "It's consistent with apex predator behavior if the predator is also a navigator," Cal said. "If it uses fixed structures to orient in the upper atmosphere. The station's been here 30 years. That's a long time to become a landmark." Velthari said nothing for a long moment. "That's an interesting theory," she said finally. "It changes the hunt parameters significantly." "I know," Cal said. "I figured you'd want to know." He didn't say it as a courtesy. He said it as a statement of fact, which somehow made it land harder. That evening, Cal ate dinner in the maintenance staff canteen, a utilitarian space 3 levels below the Hunt Command Suite, where the environmental controls were still running amber because the coupling repair hadn't addressed the root cause. He had a list of root causes 3 pages long and was working through them in order of urgency. Torath Ven sat across from him. This had started happening on day 5. Cal wasn't entirely sure when they'd shifted from professional contact to something that might, by loose definition, be called companionship, but it had something to do with the fact that they both ate fast and were both usually thinking about something else while they did it. "The princess is talking about you," Torethven said. "I know." Cal wasn't looking up from his repair schematic. Not dismissively. "I know that too." He marked a junction point on the schematic. "She's smart. She saw the fracture data." Torethven was quiet for a moment. Then, "Kerfthal is not talking about you dismissively either, but for different reasons." Cal looked up. "He thinks you're a liability in the hunt zone," Torethven said. "He's been making that case to the princess." "I'm not going into the hunt zone." "No, but Kerfthal has suggested that if the creature is using the station as a navigation reference, as you theorized, then the optimal hunting position is adjacent to the station's lower hull, in the structure's electromagnetic shadow. The creature comes to orient, and the hunters are waiting." Cal was quiet. He looked at his schematic. He looked at Torethven. "The lower hull," he said, "section 9 through 14. "Yes. That's where I found the fracture." "Yes. And the 2 conduit junctions I flagged last week as requiring immediate inspection. I believe those are in that section, yes." Cal put down the schematic. He stared at the table for a moment. "The princess knows this." "The princess," Torethven said carefully, "has been presented with the tactical advantages of that position and has found them compelling. The structural concerns you flagged have been summarized for her in a way that characterized them as minor." Cal looked at him. "By Kerfthal," Torethven added quietly. Cal spent the next 2 hours in section 9 through 14 with a handheld scanner, a pressure gauge, and the uncomfortable suspicion that he was verifying something he already knew. The fracture he'd found and flagged had been addressed. Someone had applied a surface sealant, the kind of patch that made an inspection scan look clean without actually addressing the underlying structural issue. The 2 conduit junctions he'd flagged were still unfixed. In the electromagnetic environment of a surfacing event, he'd read the encounter logs. He knew what the creature's field signature looked like. The junction insulation would fail. Not immediately, maybe not catastrophically, but in combination with the surface patch fracture and the resonant stress of a large creature using the hull as a navigation beacon, the probability math was not something he wanted to do. He filed an urgent maintenance report. He marked it priority 1. He requested an immediate hold on hunt zone designation for sections 9 through 14 pending structural review. He got a response 40 minutes later. Request noted. Deferred pending hunt command review. He sat in the maintenance corridor in section 11, his back against a hull plate that hummed slightly wrong, and thought about the UHSS Kestrel. The Kestrel had died because someone in authority had reviewed an urgent maintenance flag and decided the timing was inconvenient, not maliciously, not out of cruelty, out of the very human and apparently very universal tendency to hear "this might fail" and translate it as "this probably won't fail right now." The Kestrel's drive core had given 17 warning signs over 4 months, and each one had been deferred pending something else, until the something else ran out. He'd spent 11 months in the drift. 7 crew members had not made it back. He pulled out his data stylus and started making notes. Princess Velthari did not sleep well that night. This was unusual. She had hunted in conditions of genuine physical danger throughout her career, had been injured twice by prey that turned out to be more capable than the briefing materials suggested, had once spent 3 days in an alien wilderness with a failing suit and a broken beacon waiting for extraction. She did not lose sleep before hunts. She lay in her quarters and thought about the human. Not his theory about the creature, though she had found that genuinely interesting, had turned it over in her mind and found it more robust the more she examined it, found it explaining details in the encounter logs that had previously seemed like noise. She thought about the way he'd looked at the junction on the starboard wall of the Hunt Command suite, the way his eyes had gone there automatically, not to impress or to perform, but because something in him cataloged structural details as a matter of reflex. She had hunters who were technically excellent. She had hunters who were brave. She had Caerthal, who was the finest apex hunter in the Conclave's third house and who had the kill record to prove it. She had never had a hunter who found a fracture with his hands. She pulled up the maintenance report on her personal screen. Priority 1. Immediate hold requested, deferred. She read it again. She got up. Cal was still in Section 11 when she found him. He was pressed flat against the hull plate, his left palm, his right palm, his cheek, a posture that should have looked absurd, a maintenance trainee in gray coveralls with his face against a bulkhead in the middle of the night, and somehow did not. She stopped in the corridor doorway and watched him without announcing herself. After a moment he said, without moving, "The hum changed 2 hours ago. Frequency dropped by about 4%. You've been here 2 hours. Someone applied sealant to the fracture, didn't address the root. The sealant is deforming under thermal cycling. When it deforms fully, the fracture will propagate into the conduit housing." Velthari stepped into the corridor. The lighting was maintenance level dim, blue shifted, designed for function over comfort. In it, the human looked like something from a different world entirely, which of course he was. "Caerthal told me the structural concerns were minor," she said. "Caerthal isn't wrong that they were minor," Cal said. "They're not minor anymore." He peeled himself off the hull plate and turned to face her. "The sealant application was done by someone who knows how to make a scan look good. That's a specific kind of knowledge, not maintenance knowledge, quality control evasion knowledge." The silence in the corridor was complete, except for the hum of the hull plate. "That's a serious allegation," Velthari said. "It's a maintenance observation," Cal said. "What you do with it is up to you." She looked at him for a long moment. In the dim light, his eyes were a very ordinary shade of brown, the kind of color you'd find in soil, in wood, in things that grew in planetary gravity and took their time. Nothing dramatic, nothing that should command attention. Somehow they did. "Show me," she said. He showed her. He took her through sections 9 through 14 with the handheld scanner, walking her through each flagged point, explaining in plain language what was wrong and why it mattered and what would happen if it wasn't addressed. He didn't perform for her, didn't pitch up or sharpen his language to make it sound more alarming than it was. He just explained. She asked good questions, he noticed that. Not the questions of someone trying to poke holes in an argument, but the questions of someone genuinely trying to understand the spatial geometry of a problem. When they reached Section 13, the scanner flagged something new, a pressure differential in the conduit wall that hadn't been there in his last survey. "The sealant's moving faster than I thought," he said quietly. "Under current thermal cycling, this section will fail within 48 hours. The hunt is in 6 days. I know, but if the creature surfaces and causes a resonance event in this section," he paused. "I can give you the math, but the short version is, anyone positioned adjacent to this hull in a resonance event has a very bad time." Velthari was looking at the conduit wall. Her expression was impossible to read in the scanner's blue light. "Caerthal's recommended position," she said. "Yes." "And his team of 8. "Yes." She was quiet for a long time. "If you're wrong," she said, "I have delayed the most significant hunt of this season based on the assessment of an uncertified trainee from a species that joined the Conclave 6 months ago. Caerthal will have grounds to question my judgment in front of the third house." "I know. And if you're right." He didn't answer because the answer was obvious. She looked at him. "What do you want from this?" Cal blinked. It seemed like the question caught him off guard. and for a moment he had the expression of someone who had been operating entirely outside the frame of personal motivation and was now being asked to step back into it. "I want the section fixed before the hunt," he said finally, "and I want whoever applied that sealant to explain to someone why they did it. That's all. That's all." She held his gaze for a moment, then she pulled out her personal communicator. Thal was summoned to Section 13 at 3 in the morning, which was already a statement. He arrived with 2 of his hunters, reflex tactical habit, and found the princess standing beside a maintenance trainee with a handheld scanner, and an expression that Thal had learned, over years of working with her, to read carefully. "The conduit," she said. Thal looked at the scanner readout she extended to him. He was quiet for a long moment. "The sealant application was a reasonable precautionary measure," he said. "The initial report characterized the fracture as potentially significant. The sealant resolves the immediate risk while allowing the hunt timeline to proceed. The initial report characterized it as Priority 1. Priority designations from an uncertified trainee should be weighed accordingly, Highness. And the pressure differential in the conduit wall, was that also within acceptable parameters?" Thal looked at the reading. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle recalibration, the kind that experienced hunters and experienced prey both recognized. "That differential wasn't present in the last survey," he said. "No," the princess said. "It developed in the 8 hours since the sealant was applied." The 2 hunters behind Thal exchanged a look. "The hunt position recommendation," Velthari said, "was yours. The tactical advantage of the electromagnetic shadow was your assessment. The characterization of the structural concerns as minor was your summary to me." She paused. "You will want to think very carefully about your next statement." Thal stood in the maintenance corridor of Section 13, in the dim blue light, and he thought. He had 11 apex kills across 4 systems. He had shoulder markings that signified the highest field certification in the Conclave's hunting hierarchy. He had navigated the politics of the Third House for 20 years, had survived 3 leadership transitions, had maintained his position through a combination of genuine skill and very careful alliances. He was looking at a conduit wall that was failing. "The position recommendation," he said carefully, "was based on incomplete information." "Yes," Velthari said, "it was." "What happened next took 4 days and was, in the technical sense, unremarkable." Cal fixed the sections. He and Torethven worked through sections 9 through 14 with proper tools and proper materials, doing it right this time, replacing the surface-batched fracture plate with a proper structural insert, rebuilding the conduit junction insulation from the ground up, reinforcing 2 adjacent hull sections that the deeper inspection revealed as needing attention. The station's chief of operations was present for most of it. So, occasionally, was Velthari. Thal was not present. He spent the 4 days in the Hunt Command Suite, reviewing encounter logs, and what he was looking for in them was visible in his expression to anyone who cared to look. He was looking for the place where the human's theory about the creature's navigational behavior was wrong. He was a methodical hunter. When he hunted something, he understood it completely first. He found at the end of day 2 that the theory was not wrong. He found at the end of day 3 that the theory explained something in the encounter logs that he had filed as anomalous behavior and moved past. A pattern of approach angles that made no sense for an ambush predator and perfect sense for a navigator. He went to find the human. Cal was in Section 11 doing final checks on the conduit insulation when he heard boots in the corridor. He didn't look up. He knew the sound of Thal's specific gait by now. Everyone on the station had learned it, the hunter equivalent of footsteps that announced themselves. Thal crouched beside him in the corridor. He was quiet for a moment. "The encounter log from 31 months ago," he said. The creature spent 4 hours in contact with the station's lower hull before retreating. No structural damage. No predatory behavior at all, Cal said. Just the contact pattern. You think it was calibrating? I think it was doing what any navigator does when it finds a reliable landmark after a long time without one. Taking a fix. Kervthal was quiet. Where does it go when it submerges? Cal asked. The deep atmosphere, below the level our sensors can penetrate. And how long are the submersion cycles? Variable. The longest recorded was 11 months. Cal stopped working. He looked at the conduit wall. 11 months. It's going somewhere, he said. Not just living in the atmosphere, it's making journeys. The station is a waypoint on a route we haven't mapped yet. The silence in Section 11 had a different quality than it had before. The quality of two people sitting with an idea that was larger than the space they were in. That's not Hun intelligence, Kervthal said slowly. That's something else, Cal said. Yeah. Kervthal looked at him. For the first time since Cal had come aboard, Kervthal looked at him the way Torethven had looked at him after the fracture. Not with dismissal, not with assessment, but with the slightly unsettled expression of someone whose mental map has just been updated. You're not going to be a trainee for long, Kervthal said. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was a recalibration stated aloud. Probably not, Cal said, and went back to the insulation check. The creature surfaced on day 6, on schedule, which was itself evidence for the navigational theory, the timing too precise for pure biological rhythm, too correlated with the station's orbital position to be coincidence. It came up through the upper atmosphere in the pre-dawn window, its field signature appearing on the station's sensors as a rolling electromagnetic distortion, the kind of reading that made the automated alarms light up and then confused themselves trying to categorize it. Cal was in the maintenance monitoring station on level 3, watching the sensor feeds. He'd been there since midnight. Not because anyone had asked him to be, because he'd fixed the sections, and now he needed to know if the fix held. The creature was vast. He'd seen the encounter logs, but numbers and holographic reconstructions didn't capture the quality of something that size moving with purpose through an alien atmosphere. The station's hull registered the first contact as a tremor, not a blow, not an impact, but a gentle pressure, the way a very large hand might press against a surface to feel its texture. The resonance frequency shifted exactly as he'd predicted. The repaired sections held. The conduit insulation held. The replaced fracture plate flexed within parameters and held. He let out a long, slow breath. The sensor feeds showed the hunt party deploying from the station's midsection airlocks, a different position than Kervthal's original recommendation, chosen by Velthari after consultation with Cal's structural report and Kervthal's updated tactical analysis. They were positioned in the station's electromagnetic wake, which put them out of the creature's direct contact zone while keeping them within engagement range. Cal watched the sensor feeds. What happened next took 40 minutes and was, in the technical sense, a very clean hunt. Kervthal was a genuinely excellent hunter. His team was coordinated and precise. The creature, confronted with a threat it apparently had no evolutionary context for, responded with power and speed that the sensor feeds captured as a storm of readings. Electromagnetic bursts, pressure waves, movement signatures that the station system struggled to track, and Kervthal's team moved through it like water finding the gaps in rock. But that wasn't what Cal was watching. He was watching the creature. He'd been watching the encounter logs for days. He'd built a picture in his mind of how it moved, how it thought, or at least how it behaved, which was the closest you could get to thinking in something that experienced the universe on a scale that different. And what he was watching now, on the sensor feeds, was not the behavior of a predator that had been caught off guard. It was the behavior of a navigator that had been interrupted. It wasn't angry. It wasn't hunting. It was disoriented, responding to threats that were coming from the place it had expected to be a safe waypoint, a fixed reference, a landmark it had returned to across 11 months of deep atmosphere travel. He reached for his communicator. Princess Velthari. Her voice came back taut with hunt focus. What? It's not defending. It's confused. It came here expecting. He paused. How did you explain this quickly? It came here expecting to be somewhere safe. It thinks the station is an environmental feature. It's trying to navigate around a threat that isn't in any of its maps. A silence on the line. The flanking formation, Velthari said. If it's not predatory, it's... You're surrounding something that's trying to find north. Another silence, longer this time. Then hold positions. He heard Kervthal's voice in the background, sharp with protest. Then Velthari again, firm and clear. Hold positions, everyone, now. The creature stopped. It had been moving in a tight spiral pattern that Cal had recognized from the encounter logs as the thing it did when it returned to the station. The orientation sequence, the taking of a fix. It had been doing that through the chaos of the hunt team's engagement, through the electromagnetic interference of their equipment, and now that the engagement had stopped, it completed the sequence. The station's sensors recorded a specific electromagnetic pulse, sharp, clean, directional, pointing deep into the gas giant's southern hemisphere. Then the creature submerged. It did not damage the station. It did not engage the hunt team. It sank back into the copper and violet atmosphere of Ethon 11 and was gone within minutes, leaving a wake of settling electromagnetic distortion and a sensor record that the station systems had no category for. In the maintenance monitoring station on level 3, Cal sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. The pulse had been directional, pointing somewhere specific. He pulled up the stellar cartography database and ran an overlay on the pulse direction, tracking it out through the gas giant's atmosphere, through the system's orbital plane, into the wider catalog. The line terminated at a system 7 light-years out. Catalog designation, Ethon 7. No known civilizations, no station, no conclave presence. He stared at it. Then he started typing. Princess Velthari read the report in the Hunt Command Suite 2 hours later. The trophy holographics were still active on the walls, 12 apex kills, framed and lit, and she was standing at the main console with the report pulled up on the primary screen, reading it with the focused stillness of someone who has received news that requires immediate and careful thought. The report was 12 pages long and included the cartographic analysis, the encounter log cross-references, the directional pulse data, and, in the final 2 pages, a theory about what Ethon 7 might be. Not a speculation, a theory carefully built from accumulated evidence, with the uncertain parts labeled as uncertain and the solid parts labeled as solid. The solid parts were very solid. Kervthal stood at the back of the room, reading over her shoulder at the secondary console. He had been very quiet since the hunt suspension. He's suggesting, Velthari said, that the creature is a sentinel. That's what the evidence suggests, Kervthal said. He paused. The navigational behavior, the 11-month cycles, the pulse, it's consistent. A sentinel for something at Ethon 7. Or a caretaker, or a messenger. The concept doesn't have a clean translation in our classification system. Velthari looked at the cartographic overlay, 7 light-years. The conclave had a presence in most of the surveyed volume within 15 light-years of station Karathvel. Ethon 7 was surveyed. No known civilizations. No station. The last survey of Ethon 7 had been conducted 22 years ago. We need a new survey, she said. Yes. She turned to look at Kervthal. He met her gaze steadily, the expression of a man who has processed an unpleasant truth and is now operating in its context. "You were going to put your entire team in Section 13, she said. "Yes, on the basis of an assessment that you had characterized to me as minor." "Yes." She held his gaze for a moment longer, then she looked back at the screen. The human filed a report from the monitoring station, time-stamped 4 minutes after the creature submerged. She scrolled to the final line. "He requests," she paused. "He requests confirmation that the structural repairs in sections 9 through 14 are holding to specification, and notes that the Section 11 conduit junction will require follow-up inspection in 30 days. The room was quiet. "He fixed our station," Carefthal said, "warned us about a structural failure that would have killed my team, declined to kill a creature that turns out to be scientifically significant, identified a navigational pattern in the encounter logs that 30 years of station operation missed, and then immediately filed a follow-up maintenance note." "Yes," Velthari said. "In gray coveralls," Carefthal said, "with no wing patches." She almost smiled. It was a small thing, controlled, but it was there. "No," she said. "Not for much longer." Cal was in the canteen when they came for him. Velthari, Surath, Carefthal, and 2 of Careftal's senior hunters. He was eating fast and thinking about something else, which was his standard canteen configuration, and he looked up when they arrived with the expression of someone who is assessing whether a situation requires immediate action. Velthari sat down across from him. This was unusual enough that he put down his fork. "The Conclave operates a field assessment certification track," she said. "It's not the standard pathway. It's used for individuals who demonstrate competencies that don't map to the standard training framework." She paused. "It requires a formal nomination from an Apex-ranked hunter." Cal looked at her. Then he looked at Carefthal, who was standing slightly behind her with the expression of someone who has decided something and is committed to it. "The nomination requires the nominating hunter to provide a formal account of the competencies demonstrated," Velthari continued. "Carefthal has informed me he is prepared to provide that account." "For me," Cal said. "For you." He was quiet for a moment. Outside the viewport beside the canteen table, Ethon 11 churned its copper and violet atmosphere, beautiful and enormous, harboring in its depths a creature that had been navigating the space between stars for longer than any of them had been alive, following a route nobody had mapped yet. "What does the certification get me?" he asked. "Access," Surath said. "Classification. The ability to file reports that aren't deferred pending review." "I'd like the ability to file reports that aren't deferred pending review," Cal said. "I suspected as much," Velthari said. He looked at her, she looked back. "You laughed," he said, "the first day through the viewport." She didn't look away. "Yes. Boot rubber and stripped wire." "It seemed," she paused, "it seemed like a small thing." "It was a small thing," he said. "It's usually the small things." The hum of the station was all around them. The environmental systems he'd fixed, the conduit junctions he'd rebuilt, the hull sections that were now holding to specification, the whole complex network of systems that had to work continuously and quietly for anything else to be possible. You never noticed when it was working right. You only noticed when it wasn't. That was the job, noticing. Not for glory, not for the wing patches, not for the certification, though he'd take the certification because it meant reports that didn't get deferred and deferred reports got people killed, but because 11 months in the drift had taught him something about what kept things alive. Not the grand gestures, not the apex moments, but the continuous, unglamorous work of paying attention, feeling for the fracture with your hand, listening for the hum that had changed. Filing the report at 4 in the morning because you'd been awake anyway, and the section needed checking. He picked up his fork. "When do I start?" he said. The certification process, it turned out, involved a practical assessment. This was standard for the field assessment track, a series of competency evaluations conducted by the nominating hunter and at least 2 Apex-certified witnesses. What was not standard was the location Caravthal chose for it. The lower hull sections, 9 through 14, conducted in real time while the station ran full system checks. "You repaired these sections," Caravthal said, standing in the corridor of Section 11. He had a datapad in one hand and the expression of someone who had spent 2 days revising his assessment of a situation. "Walk me through the structural logic." Cal walked him through it. All of it: the fracture mechanics, the thermal cycling analysis, the conduit insulation rebuild, the resonance frequency changes he'd monitored over 4 days. He didn't simplify. He didn't embellish. He used conclave technical terminology where it applied and human technical terminology where it was more precise. And twice Caravthal stopped him and asked him to repeat something in slower conclave terms, and Cal did, and Caravthal made notes. "The pressure gauge," Caravthal said when they were in Section 13. "When you detected the deforming sealant, you used a handheld scanner." "And my hand," Cal said. "Show me." Cal pressed his palm flat against the hull plate. He held it there for 30 seconds. Caravthal and the 2 witness hunters watched in complete silence. "The frequency is nominal," Cal said. "There's a micro-oscillation at the eastern junction," he moved his palm slightly, "that I want to watch. Not a problem now, might be in 90 days. Caravthal looked at the eastern junction. He pulled out his scanner and ran a sweep. The scanner returned nominal across all parameters. "Your scanner won't catch it yet," Cal said. "The amplitude's too small, but the frequency is 2% off from the rest of the plate. Same pattern as the original fracture, earlier stage." Caravthal stared at the reading. Then he looked at Cal's hand still resting on the hull plate. "You're going to want a notation on that," Cal said, "so it's in the maintenance log, 90 days. Caravthal wrote it down. The certification assessment continued for 3 days. By the end of it, Cal had the distinct impression that Caravthal was no longer assessing him, but studying him, the way a very good hunter studies something it has encountered for the first time and is trying to understand. On the final day, standing in the Hunt Command Suite with the certification documentation spread across the primary console, Caravthal said, "In my career, I have assessed many candidates for many certifications. I have never assessed someone who felt a fracture through a hull plate. Most people haven't had 11 months to develop the sensitivity," Cal said. "That's not a thing that can be taught." "Sure it can, it just takes time and necessity." He paused. "Most people have the luxury of using good tools. I didn't for 11 months, so I learned to use myself." Caravthal considered this. "You're describing a human thing." "I don't know, maybe. I think it's a people thing. Any people who have spent long enough in conditions where the usual tools don't work and failure costs everything. You develop," he searched for the word, "economy. You use what you have. You don't waste anything, including your senses." "Economy," Caravthal repeated. He looked at the certification document. "The conclave classification framework doesn't have a category for this." "That's the field assessment track's whole problem," Surith said from across the room, with the dry tone of someone who had been dealing with classification frameworks for too long. "It's for the things that don't fit categories." Caravthal picked up the stylus and signed the nomination document. Velthari countersigned it in her quarters that evening, alone. She sat at her desk with the document and a cup of something warm and looked out at the gas giant for a while before she picked up the stylus. She thought about what she had come here to do. She had come to take a trophy, an apex kill, a creature of genuine danger in a setting of genuine challenge. She had hunted for 20 years and she understood the thing that drove it, the desire to test yourself against something that could actually kill you, to come back from it having won. She thought about the creature now somewhere in the depths of Ethon 11, making its way through the storm layers toward whatever was at Ethon 7. navigating, doing its job. She thought about the human in the maintenance corridor at 3 in the morning, his cheek pressed against the hull plate, listening. She thought about how easy it had been to dismiss him, how natural it had felt. The gray coveralls, the stripped wire, the boot rubber, the species with 6 months in the conclave and no wing patches and no formal framework, the laugh that had come so easily. She thought about Section 13 and Kervthal's 8 hunters positioned in its electromagnetic shadow. She picked up the stylus and signed. The Ethon 7 survey mission was formally commissioned 3 weeks later, drawing on the encounter data, the cartographic analysis, and the directional pulse records that Cal had filed in his monitoring station report. It was a conclave scientific mission, the first of its kind in that sector, crewed by researchers rather than hunters. Cal wasn't on it. He was on Station Karathvel, 4 levels below the Hunt Command Suite, running through the maintenance backlog he'd been building since he arrived. It was 3 pages long. He was working through it in order of urgency. He had his wing patches now. 2 of them, which the Conclave's field assessment track awarded for demonstrated competency rather than training hours. A different philosophy than the standard track, one that Surath had explained to him with the air of someone who had argued for the field assessment track's expansion for years and was using every opportunity to make the case by example. He wore them on the gray coveralls. He hadn't gotten different coveralls. Toreth Vin looked at the patches every time he sat across from Cal at dinner and said nothing about them. But after the first week, he started bringing the maintenance backlog to dinner with him, and they worked through it together, eating fast and thinking about something else. The station hummed around them, the fixed sections, the rebuilt junctions, the hull plates holding to specification, the environmental controls running green, the deep sound of systems doing their job. Nobody noticed, which was exactly right. Outside, the gas giant turned slowly, copper and violet, its depths keeping their own counsel. Somewhere in the atmosphere, or past it, a creature that had been navigating between stars before humans had figured out iron was moving toward a destination it had known about for longer than any of them could reckon. And 7 light-years out, the Ethon 7 survey mission was 3 weeks from its first data return, carrying questions that nobody had thought to ask before a maintenance trainee in gray coveralls had pressed his hand to a hull plate and started paying attention. The follow-up inspection for the Section 11 Eastern Junction was logged for 90 days. Cal set a reminder,